one of two final events celebrating our 20th anniversary here at the Beach Museum of Art. I do want to just mention that Thursday night at 5:30, we will have Tom Rawson, Gary Hellebust, and Charles Reagan talking about the process of creating the Beach Museum of Art building. So we would love to have you join us then. But tonight, we are going to think about the early years, the building up of the collection that was the starting collection of the Beach Museum of Art. And we have some wonderful guests that we are very, very happy to welcome for this evening. First of all, I'd like to welcome Mary Helm Pollock, whose father was very, very influential in the whole process. Dr. John Helm really started the Friends of Art, started the gift print program, and we wouldn't be here today without him. So welcome, Mary. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our three speakers. We'll let them each talk a little bit about some of their memories of building our collection. And then we will have a question and answer session. But I thought I'd go ahead and introduce you all first so that I don't have to just keep popping in between you. So first of all, we are thrilled to have Rae Stamey here. Rae and Bill Stamey came to K-State in 1953. And Bill was the Dean of Arts and Sciences from 1970 to 1987. So very key years for the formation of the collection. And we are really lucky to have Rae. Rae has been a member of the Friends of Art. When I came here, Rae was on the Friends board, and I remember planning just a few parties with you. I also remember the aftermath of a few parties. But Rae is really one of the historians of the gift print collection that we have. And the Stamey Gallery at Meadowlark has almost all. How many are missing? Only 3 missing gift prints. So Rae is going to talk to us a little bit about some of those early years and her memories, and I think she's going to share some of Bill's memories as well. Our second speaker will be Charles Stroh. Professor Stroh was here at K-State from 1980 to 1997. And at that point in time, helped again to build the art collection, but also was really influential in the campaign to ask for an art museum for K-State. And leader of the group that really petitioned the Weefalds when they were coming here to K-State to consider having an art museum. So again, we have another person that if you hadn't been here, we might not be here. So we're thrilled to have Charles Stroh. And finally, Jessica Reichman, who was curator of the collection when I came here. And Jessica was hired in 1983. Her job was to run around campus and find everything, which was an amazing job. One of the wonderful things about this collection is that it was all over campus. And K-State students were exposed to the wonderful regional art that really reflected their culture. The problem is that we now know that art needs climate control and light control. And when Jessica gave me my first tour, it was a lot of hoofing it. So we can do so much now educationally by having the collection all in one place. So, but Jessica was really wonderful about getting outreach exhibitions of the collection into the community. So Jessica will share some of her memories. So I am just thrilled to have all 3 of you and Mary here tonight, some old friends since I've been here for 22 years, and these are all people that have played a really important role in the Beach Museum, and just so excited to have you here tonight. We're going to make you stand up here.
That's fine.
There's a little light.
Yeah. I was hoping I didn't trust myself just to ad-lib this, so I did this morning jot down a few the things that I thought were most important to talk about, and so hopefully I can read this now. Bill and I came in 1953, as I had, as had been said before, and Bill was a member of the mathematics department, and his department head was Ralph Sanger, and he wanted us to know about the cultural activities on campus. And one event that he took us to was the Friends of Art dinner. It was in Thompson Hall, and that was a time, it was before we had a union or any place like that, and so that was where the college cafeteria was in the top of Thompson Hall. In those days, you got the dinner for two and the gift print for $5. But as I've said before, but we had to go and pay a babysitter for our 3 kids. So I added that in. Let's see. We continued to attend these events because we thought we were helping the art department, which had always been important to both of us. And so we acquired one every year, and I just put them in a closet. I didn't frame them or anything, but I just put them in the closet. And during this time, I would often see prints at estate sales or antique shops, and they would sort of speak to me, and when they were $1 or $2, I would purchase them and put them in the closet with all the rest of them. But sometimes I think I'd recognize an artist's name or something, and I just kind of think, oh, that looks kind of like one of the Friends of Art prints, but I had no idea at all, not until Jessica came. Through these years at K-State, K-State had acquired an extensive art collection, and President Ocker was encouraging the College of Arts and Sciences to get an inventory. At that time, Jessica Reichman was hired to do that job. Bill did that. She was extremely successful, and Bill was very, very pleased. When she published the list and dates of the Friends of Art prints, and Bill brought a copy home to me, well, this. I went through my inventory in the closet, and I was shocked and pleased to learn that we had the first 5 gift prints, 1934 through 1938, and I had no idea what these were for sure until then. Also, I was happy to realize that we had many others, and now they are on display in the hallway on the ground floor at Meadowlark Hills. We are missing only 3 and hope to acquire those. Someone asked, how did I find so many? And I replied, they found me. And I honestly think that how I would know or get this feeling that I should get these, because I didn't have like 50 or 100. It wasn't that I had lots of extras. Most of them were Friends of Art prints. And so that's my story, and I thank Jessica especially for helping me locate them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chuck Strow. I'm not quite as generous with my time as Rae was, so I'm going to take a few more minutes than she did, if you'd bear with me. I came to K-State in 1980 and stayed here until 1997 when I left to become the director of the School of Art at Gwen Frostic School of Art at Kalamazoo, in Kalamazoo, Michigan, at Western Michigan University. And it was a good time for me to leave and a good move for me, but it happened to coincide with the beginning of this particular facility, which I had spent an awful lot of time working on. So it was a bittersweet leaving. And let me tell you just a bit about it. While I was here, I worked under the supervision of Bill Stamey and his infamous associate dean, whose name was Jack Carpenter. And a more amazing duo I couldn't think of, because for me and for the art department and for this museum, they were fantastic. But they were 2 pretty distinct types of personalities, and I love them both. This is Bill, and I think you all probably know Bill. He's the husband of Rae, and Rae was also incredibly generous with us, but Bill is really the reason why things fell into place in 1982-83 when they did. So let me tell you that story. And it's a story that I'm not sure even Bill knows, actually. Let's see. In 1982, a serendipitous event occurred. 1933, President F.D. Farrell had received 4 paintings on loan from the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. In 1944, John Helm returned 2 of those paintings to the National Portrait Gallery. But in 1980, when I arrived, actually 1982, I arrived in 80, but 82, I got a letter from the National Portrait Gallery saying, please return the other 2 paintings to us. Well, this is where the story starts. The letter identified the 2 paintings as paintings by Alice Pike Barney. I didn't know who Alice Pike Barney was. I had to look her up. But more importantly, I had no idea what these 2 paintings were or where they were. I'd never heard of them. It was completely a mystery to me. They were described in the letter this way. One of the paintings is Lady V. It's a pastel on paper with an oil glaze. It's 48 inches by 19.5 inches and is a full-length portrait of a lady in a black evening gown which covers her left shoulder. The strap for her right shoulder has slid down her arm. Her right arm is straight by her side, and her left arm is bent slightly at the elbow and the wrist. Her head is tilted slightly toward the right shoulder, and a great mass of dark hair is piled on her head. Her eyes are dark, and her lids are lowered. What? This is Kansas State University, for God's sake. who is Lady V? And where in the hell is Lady V? You know, absolutely no idea. I had no clue. I talked with everyone. I wrote letters to people. I tried to figure out who in the devil these Alice Pike Barney and Lady V was. I talked to somebody who had told me that Farrell Library had had both of these paintings on display at various times. And this one, Lady V, this person told me, had been thrown out a number of years ago. Thrown out. Gott in Himmel. Somehow, I talked to another person who said no, they hadn't been thrown out. They had been sold at auction a number of years ago. And in the midst of my despair at the time, somehow being sold at auction seemed merciful. They hadn't been thrown out, despite the fact that they might be in Memphis or Oklahoma City or Portland or somewhere else, and I may never ever find them. At least I didn't have to tell the National Portrait Gallery they had been thrown out. Well, after a couple weeks of agony and lost sleep, I got a folded message in my mailbox in the art department that said, quote, "With regard to the missing paintings, contact Max Miller and see if he can help." I've never known for certain who wrote that message, but I think it was Jack O'Shea. And the reason I think it was Jack was because Jack used to play poker at Max Miller's cabin. I think it was on Wabunsee Lake, I've forgotten. But Jack used to play poker there with a group of people every month. And Jack was in the art department, and I don't think anyone wanted to sort of stick their neck out on this thing. I had been getting phone calls from Chicago, for God's sake, saying, "I understand Kansas State University has lost 2 paintings that belong to the National Collection." Well, what was serendipitous about this event was this. Those 2 paintings had a value just south of $100,000. They were not trivial pieces. And it turns out that Alice Pike Barney was a significant artist that I, in my own naivete, didn't know at the time. Well, when I discovered that, Bill and I had talked at various times about problems with the permanent collection and the difficulty of having the permanent collection connected with the art department. I mean, I was head of the art department, and I had 23 or 24 faculty at the time, plus all the crap that goes on with being a department head. But then try to deal with the university collection. And ever since 1890, well, John Helm didn't start in 1890, but since 1890, there had been calls for a museum on campus and for the need to have some way of supervising what we owned on campus. And John Helm had pursued that for much of the 20th century. And here in 1980, the National Museum was saying, where are these 2 paintings that belong to us? And I'm saying to myself, what the hell am I doing here? Well, Bill Stamey came forward. And I can't tell you how important it was that Bill saw his way to hiring Jessica Reichman. And she came in 1983. So between 1980 and 1983, there was absolutely no supervision over the university permanent collection. And there were paintings in the most amazing places on campus. I mean, when I first came, there was a Thomas Hart Benton painting hanging in the 2nd floor of the library, immediately to the left of the elevator that went out of the library, for God's sake, you know. The permanent collection had been accumulating since the 1890s, but there wasn't an art department on campus until 1966, which is pretty amazing, really, because John Helm, who had taken the responsibility for promoting and developing art all around this whole region, and who had been kind of a de facto curator of that collection, had done so from the College of Architecture. I mean, there wasn't a Department of Art. There you go. That's right. And so the art department really sort of happened between 1970 and 1966, but 1970 to 1980 is when everybody was hired. And this man is responsible for an awful lot of that. Well, when I got this note from Jack O'Shea, I thought to myself, what am I going to do about this? So I got a hold of Max Miller, and I said, Max, what about these paintings? Well, it turns out, the reason I can tell this story now is that Max died about 10 years ago or 9 years ago. And honest to God, nobody has known this story. And in fact, I'm not sure Bill even knows it. You know? Okay, well, I got various kinds of messages, and I heard, okay. The point was that Max Miller had bought these two paintings at an auction that the Farrell Library had held, and Max had bought the two paintings for $5 a piece. And they hung in his cabin on Wabaunsee Lake. Lady V, with her black dress draped over her shoulder and her mass of dark hair piled on her right shoulder and her eyelids lowered, hung right above the poker table. Which seems like an appropriate place for an appropriate painting at an appropriate time. Well, Jack O'Shea was there with other people, losing his nickels, dimes, and quarters at this game called poker. And Jack put this note in my mailbox, I think. I called Max, and I said, what about this? Max said, yeah, I have them. We talked, and in his generosity, he returned the paintings, which is pretty incredible. I mean, we're talking about $100,000 worth of artwork here. I mean, if nothing else, he could have bargained a bit, you know, and okay. Well, he brought them in and had them in my office for a period of time. They had huge museum frames around them. They were probably 12 inches wide. They were carved wood with gold leaf over the top of them. You know, they were magnificent frames. And I'll tell you this, but I don't want anyone else to know. I made a deal with Max. Max said, all I want are the frames. I thought to myself, okay, fine, that's a pretty good deal. I'll get these paintings sent back to the National Gallery, and all it's going to cost me and cost the university are the frames. So I gave Max the frames, and the paintings were sent back to the National Gallery. It was that event that essentially started Bill Stamey's inertia toward hiring this lady. And everything got easier after that, at least from my point of view, because Jessica did a hell of a job. Prior to her, there had been records. John Helm kept records, but they were records that were written on pieces of paper, on scraps of paper, and stuck in an envelope somewhere. I mean, they weren't very good records. Nothing you could remotely call curatorial. And so when Jessica came, it was the first time we really had some system of organization that counted for something. And it's basically what led to the reason why we're here. Okay. I'm sure you didn't buy it for her, you tightwad. Okay. I remember it very well. 1986 is when it was. I remember it very well. Between 1986, she was hired in 1983. Up until 1992, she worked full-time, but was paid part-time wages. And you know, without her, none of this would have happened. Out of your pocket, I imagine. Oh, absolutely. Bill, in 1983, Bill authorized a budget for the permanent collection. We had talked about the need for that because it didn't make a lot of sense to hire a curator and not have some kind of a budget. And Bill was very insightful and very good and very helpful about providing us some money. And at the time, it was terribly important. Not just for the permanent collection, but as you're pointing out, for a kind of future, you know, that grew here. Okay, enough said. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here today, and it's lovely to be back in Manhattan and to be in this beautiful museum. So I'm just delighted to see so many old friends and colleagues. So thanks for coming tonight. As Chuck already said, John Helm was our first curator of the University Art Collection, and he had a vision for the collection that was quite remarkable. He already knew that it needed to be Midwest regionalism, because that was the focus of the, first of all, it was what the university could afford to collect, because they didn't have much money. And the two first acquisitions, were two large paintings by Birger Sanzin, or Sanzane, I'm never quite sure how to pronounce that. In fact, one of them is at the far end of the hallway. That used to be in President Weefald's office. And then the other large one was in the Bluemont room. And so, as Chuck said, these remarkable works of art, incredibly valuable, were just free for everyone to look at, which is lovely, but it's also quite worrying. And the one I remember that scared me the most was the Thomas Hart Benton Horses Running with the Train. It's a watercolor, and it was in the Union. And it was just right there, you know, and as Chuck said, anyone could have just taken it off the wall. Nothing was ever stolen except one of John Helm's prints, which was soon returned. Do you remember that, Mary? I wrote you a letter and told you that one of your husband's prints had been taken from the Union, and you said, well, at least they had good taste. So, yeah. So, and then John Helm also was an incredible printmaker, and so he understood the value of works on paper. And so he also helped establish the graphic arts collection here at the university. And so we have so much to owe him and honor him for getting all of this vision first established. And as Chuck also said, the collection was in disarray after John Helm died, and in that interim limbo period until the early 80s. And so a lot of the artworks had been dispersed around the campus, not just in public buildings, but in people's offices. And so it was the biggest challenge for me was to try to figure out what belonged in the collection and what was, you know, not an important piece or had no connection to the university. So it was the biggest challenge at this stage. But first I have to tell you about my job interview. This was in August of 1983. And so I had met with Chuck briefly during a pre-interview. And so Chuck said, well, I want you to see where the collection is scattered throughout campus. And so I had decided to wear a new pair of shoes that day. And so we started out in West Stadium, and we walked all the way to the vet school. And by the time, and this is in August, and I have on a suit, nylons, and these shoes that are killing me. And so Chuck dragged me all through the campus. And finally we got to the vet school, and my feet were bleeding. And Chuck said, "You doing okay there?" And I said, "No, I'm not, you know." But anyway, it gave me an idea of where these artworks were all over campus, and it gave me an idea of how challenging it would be to find them. So once we did start tracking everything down, I took them, what I could find, back to the art building. I had an office that I shared with Margot Kren on the second floor. And so someone else helped me build makeshift shelves to just eventually get the artworks off the floor and into some kind of rudimentary storage. So that was the first type of storage that we had. And then one day I was in West Stadium, and it was hot, and it was August, and I was up in some closet somewhere, and I'm throwing stuff over my old frames and old mats. I'm throwing something over my shoulder. It was an envelope, a large portfolio-style envelope, and I thought I'd better look, and it turned out to be a John Stewart Curry print. Hounds and Coyote. Yes, I'll never forget that print. And it had this huge tide mark on it where it had gotten wet and then it had dried, so this big brown stain was on it. And took it back and put it in the collection and eventually had it conserved. So those were the types of adventures I had, trying to decide what was in the collection and then how to conserve it and how to make it available, eventually make it available to the public. One of the greatest things after we started organizing the collection was to publicize it, because we had, as Ruth Ann would always say, we would hide our light under a bushel because nobody knew about the collection. So I developed slide presentations that I would take to community groups here in Manhattan and in the area and talk to Rotary Club, Elks Club, school groups, any place that needed a dinner speaker, I was available. So that helped at least in getting some of the collection more available and exposed to the local community. And then the take-home message always is that we need an art museum on campus. And so after that, we started to get a little more publicity in the paper, and at the end of my talk, I'll show you a few examples of that. So the Mercury was really good about writing stories and telling our progress, saying what we were doing to promote this idea. And then I started to develop traveling exhibits too, because since we had no place to display the works, one of the easiest ways to do that was to send them to other venues that had an appropriate gallery space. And one of them, of course, was the Gordon Parks show, and that was the first big traveling exhibit. And that had been previously organized by Chuck and Inga Balch, who had started selecting the pieces and then writing a catalog to accompany the exhibit. So I expanded on that. And Lindsay Smith, who's now the designer here for the museum, was a student at the time. And so Lindsay and he used to help me do carpentry. And so I showed him a photograph in a museum studies book of a crate that had slots in it that you could slip artwork into. And I said, "Lindsay, you can do this, can't you? You can make one of these for me." And he was doubtful at first, but he did a great job. He made 2 crates. And yeah, I know. So this was just at the beginning. And then eventually Chuck Stroh had developed and curated a very interesting collection of East Indian prints. We traveled that show. And then I did a show with Eugene Kramer from the architecture department called Buildings and Landscapes. It was a nice little show, only about 25 pieces, but it helped you understand the relationship of buildings to the landscape. So those 3 shows really worked well and were very popular. I also had some really excellent student assistants, and one of them did a fabulous show on Henry Varnum Poor, and that show was in the Union Gallery. And she wrote all of the label copies, she wrote the material for the wall panels, and did just a very excellent and professional job. And so that was another way in which we could share the collection with the students and show them about scholarship and research. And then I also had a fine student that was an excellent mat cutter, and I didn't want her to graduate because she would cut all these mats for me, which I am not a good mat cutter, but she helped tremendously. And then, of course, the great impact was the Weefald's arrival here. And Chuck was very instrumental in contacting Dr. Weefald before they arrived to say that we need an art museum on campus. And so I think that helped plant the seed. But then Ruth Ann was the real key to all of this. She met with Chuck and me. Do you remember that, Chuck? She met with us in that little library off my office. And she said, I want to work with you. And she said, I'm going to be the worker bee. She said, you can count on me. And she did, and she never, ever let us down. And then after we started to work with the foundation, Ruth Ann and I went out on tours of the state where the foundation would locate audiences that could be potential donors for the museum. And so she and I went out together. I did the presentations about the collection. She did the ask for the money. And so we did probably a dozen of these. And one night we landed in Hays, Kansas. And Mariana Beach was in the audience, and I'll never forget, she was so beautiful, inside and out, but she had on this big black hat and a black suit, and she just looked stunning, so sophisticated. And after our talk, she came up to Ruth Ann and me, and she said, Ross and I would like to help you. And, you know, as Ruth Ann said, we found our angel. And so it's been remarkable ever since. So I'd like to just close with a few photos, but first of all, I'd like to say how much this museum is just a treasure. And all of you have done such a fine job to make it as professional and beautiful as it is. And in my dreams, I never thought it would be this great. So thank you. So this is the type of publicity that the Mercury would give us. And so this type of, you know, maybe 4 or 5 times a year, which was really helpful because they would update how we were doing and progress we were making. And you can see in that, yeah.
That's okay.
No. There we go. So Tony Crawford, who's in the audience here tonight. Tony and I were hired on the same day. And so what our joke between Tony and me is that the university administration and all of their wisdom said, why do we need 2 of you? You can one person can do this job, meaning that Tony could curate the art collection and I could be the archivist. And the answer was no. So, but that was our first day. Okay, next. And then this is an example of the Sanzane painting that was in the Bluemont room, and you can see under the tagline is cultured cafeteria. I don't know. It could be. I don't know. I think that's it, isn't it? Are there any more? I think that's all. So, yeah. Well, thank you again, and thanks again for having me.
All right. Well, this has just been so wonderful to hear all these stories. I just have to say, Jessica took me on a tour of the collection on almost as hot a day as you had, and I had come from New England and was dressed, once again, in a suit. I did have sensible shoes on. So I remember that very similar. There were still pieces all over the place. And Jessica didn't tell you about the lovely computer mainframe room that we were, when I got here, we were over in the old foundation building, the one on Anderson Avenue. The collection was stored in a computer mainframe room, and Jessica had her office outside of it. And we had our daily workouts by emptying the dehumidifiers. The other thing is I took Jessica around to look at our collection storage, and one of the prominently displayed collections is the Orville Hempler collection, which got basically washed in the basement of the foundation building because it came coated in, I can't remember how many layers of dirt, but unbelievable. It has been a long journey, and it has been a wonderful journey, and there are so many people who have contributed to what we are today. And I'm so grateful for all of you for sharing your memories, and if people have questions, I'm going to
I want to add something, if I may. There are so many people, some in the forefront of things, whose names you know, and who were instrumental in getting certain things done. But there's a huge number of people who were in the background. I mean, who wrote letters, made phone calls, provided me with advice and consolation when I needed it. And I can't tell you how many people there were. And so a lot of times, even the name of somebody in a community becomes important, even if they don't necessarily do anything. It's just their prominence and their historical significance is there. And I can't say enough about how many people need to be thanked. So we're kind of sitting here, but we aren't really the real thing.
So does anybody have a question? Yes, Eileen.
Hi, I have a question for Strow. Were you involved in the Gordon Park collections that came into the museum? And yes, your story?
Okay, I'm going to just repeat that question. Eileen is asking about the Gordon, for the recording. Eileen is asking about the Gordon Parks collection and asking Chuck Stroh what he remembers about that collection coming in.
Briefly, Gordon Parks was a difficult personality. He was important. He's important in a whole variety of ways. But at the same time that he was building bridges to Kansas State University, he was building bridges to a number of other Kansas institutions at the same time. And he was, in a sense, trying to establish his own posterity in the state of Kansas. So he provided us with an important collection, but it's not significant in terms of being different from other collections in the state of Kansas. There are other similar kinds of collections that are around. And what he did was provide access to the Life magazine photographic archives in New York City and gave permission to have certain things printed from those archives. So when we received the collection, they had already been printed and mounted and in some sense exhibitable. But they couldn't be circulated because they weren't in frames and they weren't covered and they weren't protected and various kinds of things. So I had started doing that myself before Jessica came on. And I've forgotten if it had actually been circulated before Jessica got here. It had been? Okay. Yes, I'm familiar with that. I had a part in that, but it was not something that I had sought or really had any supervision over acquiring. It just sort of came to us because Gordon Parks wanted it here.
Other questions?
You want this?
Nope.
Bill went to his apartment in New York, Gordon Parks.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you have to say it in there, Ray, so they can record it.
Bill, you went to his apartment in New York, overlooked the Hudson. I remember you had a great time there. He was quite a, yeah. Okay.
Gordon Parks was an not avarice. What the hell's the word? Excited about playing tennis. Bill was excited about playing golf. I'm not sure if you had anything in common. Did you?
I'd also like to add that the Parks collection traveled to Rouen, France, where it was included in a international photography news press exhibition. So the photographers, which were all AP and other press photographers, were in awe of Parks's work, and so Parks was the featured artist in this exhibition in France, and so it was really quite an honor for K-State to be represented by that collection in that particular exhibition venue.
It's hard to do that, so I'm trying to just repeat questions.
It was in Rouen, in France, but no, only parts of it were included. I think we selected maybe 25 or 30 photos, that many. So it was a large exhibition. And another story to this is that Mr. Parks was supposed to accompany me. I was the courier for the exhibit, and Mr. Parks was supposed to accompany me for the show. And I also went to his apartment to collect him, and at the last minute, he said he wasn't going. So, yeah, so that was a little unnerving, but it all worked out just fine.
So obviously, we need to do some more research with Jessica and Chuck on the Gordon Parks collection, because it is an important collection for us. And one of the things that we are doing now is that collection came to us at a point in time where they didn't know as much about conservation. And because it traveled extensively, the works were had really suffered. And so what we are doing right now with the Gordon Parks Foundation is reprinting that collection for us so that we have pieces that we can now display from the original negatives. So we've set up a really nice relationship with the Gordon Parks Foundation so that we will be able to do much more with our collection.
Excellent. That's good to hear. When we received them, the photographs were glued to a piece of wood, like a piece of masonite, and they had wooden frames that were about 3 inches thick or so. But they were hollow in the back, so the frames went around the outside, and they were flush with the image itself. They were not by any means archival, or not by any means, So I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, so this has been a sort of a burning issue for us here at the museum because it is an important collection.
And I just want to add that if you want to see that original, or how that original photograph by Gordon Parks is mounted, you can go into the Helm gallery, right, the first gallery to your left, and there's one example. That's the only one left.
Right, there's, and the Parson Ledbetter is going to be replaced, but we've had that up on exhibition, and so it will be sent as soon as it goes off exhibition to be replaced.
So that's great news. Wonderful.
Go to the Gordon Parks Foundation and in their archives.
So. Tony.
I won't praise Jessica. I think her work But since February, I've been volunteering at the beach and going through some of the historical records, including some of those of John Helm. And then another group of records was kind of a records put together, but there were a couple of files of the Department of Art when Chuck was head, and I just want you to know how much effort that Chuck put into not only a museum, but just getting what we had stored in somewhat of appropriate manner. So I've been able to read letters. I went up to Hale a couple of weeks ago and went through President Ocker's papers 1 year, 80-81, and went through the Department of Art files, and there were a number of letters from Chuck back and forth to people, not only about a museum, but do something about the storage. And he complained to, or was trying to get help from someone in the foundation, and wrote a letter. I don't know if it's Art Lab, but anyway, and he was not very, he didn't speak very kindly of President Ocker. Well, Lab sent that letter to Bill Stamey and said, this isn't appropriate. Would you do something with Chuck Stroh to kind of calm him down? I'm paraphrasing quite a bit, but so Chuck was not adverse to rankling feathers and so forth, so he deserves a lot of credit for what he was trying to do with the collection.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not a terribly sensitive guy. and mea culpa, I understand. But Bill was incredible. I mean, he put up with a whole lot of crap.
So you might have said this, but who was Max Miller?
Okay.
What was his background?
Yeah, no, actually, thank you for asking. I had a whole lot more that I was going to say here, and I kind of abbreviated some of my comments. But Max was an extension employee, and he had been a member of Friends of Art. When I came in 1980, one of the first things I started to do was reactivate Friends of Art, because John Helm had benefited so much from that organization, and it had not been used for 10 or 12 years prior to that time, so I started it again. Max Miller was an extension employee, and he was a member of Friends of Art. Let me back up just a second, though. One of the things, in fact, Rae Stamey is part of this, and it's something I'd like to sort of put together. We had a part-time employee in the art department named Diane Dollar, who was married to a dean in engineering or business, I've forgotten. Engineering, okay. Yeah. And, Diane was really very, very important in a whole lot of ways. She convinced me to start a spring recognition dinner where we would recognize our students and supporters of the art department and various kinds of things. She also helped develop bus trips through the KSU Friends of Art to go to various art centers around the country. Rae Stamey figures into this because Rae was on virtually all of those bus trips. And we rode to Chicago, to Dallas, to all kinds of places, sometimes 2-3 days, sleeping on the damn bus, okay? And Rae was on all those trips. And I can't tell you how important those connections are, to people in the community. And a lot of it helped to soften my abrasive nature. So I'm really thankful for all of that. And Rae was a big part of that.
Liz, would you talk just a little bit about what happened later with Max Miller?
Oh, well, about the time Linda Duke came, I think this had been in the works, and Lauren Render, our previous director, knew about it, but we found out we had a major gift from Max Miller toward acquisitions. And now it's a quasi-endowment, and it's providing us the largest sort of portion of our annual acquisitions. So we're very grateful. And some of us did go to the cabin, and it was amazing. Did anybody of you ever visit the cabin? Tracy went. Oh, it was just chock full of antiques and art and records, and it was incredible from the corner to the floor. I mean, it was just incredible. And so that property came with it. Yeah.
And actually, one of the pieces that came to the museum from that collection by Joe LaRusso will be on display in a few weeks' time in our summer exhibition. So.
When I found out that Max had the paintings, we met, and part of my effusive nature was to say, Max, let me reimburse you for the $10 that you spent at the auction. He declined.
Well, I just wanted to say really quickly that I just wanted to thank you guys for being here, and to Bill Stamey for the stories. It's just such a rich history that I think even, people like me who've just been at the museum for a few years, thanks, Bill, for a few years, this is such an amazing history, and I think that the few people who know about it, it's great, but the rest of us, feel, I don't know, it just makes me feel really good to know all of this stuff. It's great, so thanks.
So, and I want to express just one more thanks, and that is from Linda Duke, who regrets that she cannot be here tonight. She unfortunately was not able to be in the country for tonight. So, but again, I think all of us just really value these stories, and we need to really think about getting these all down. So this is a good start for us on really reminding us that the oral history of this collection is really, really fascinating. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and especially our guests, Mary and Ray and Chuck and Jessica. And Chuck's going to say one more thing.
Catherine, I brought about 10 copies of something with me if anybody happens to be interested. It's a summary of 1880 to 1880. God, I'm getting old. And that 10 years when I was department head, and it summarizes basically the Department of Art, the KSU Friends of Art, and the beginnings of the Beach Museum. And if anybody's interested in these, I've got about 10 of them here, and you're welcome to them.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So, and Liz says we have copies here. So. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you all for being friends, members, supporters of this museum. Tonight is a great example of how none of this would have happened without people who care. And here it's been 22 years for me here, and it's a really special place, and it's really special people. And so thank you all for being here.